I'm going to close the blinds so I'm not backlit.
Great. Let's start your webcam. I'm going ahead and mute my. Your webcam isn't on yet. If you'd like to use it, you can go ahead and hit the button at the top of the screen.
Mine's showing here. Oh, okay, I see it. There.
There you are.
Okay.
You're backlit a little bit, but we can see a little bit of you.
I just closed all the blinds there.
Okay.
Okay, does that work?
It's shadowy, but we can see you.
Okay. I probably look better with shadows anyway.
Well, thank you for joining us today. This is Dr. Brian Miller, Director of Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. He'll be discussing the needs assessment and the decision support system overview. Thank you for joining us today, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and sign off and give you.
Kara, it's currently showing the last slide. Okay. Okay, Kara, I believe it's showing the last slide right now instead of the first slide.
So Brian, there you go. Yeah, you have to get to the outline.
Oh, there we go. Okay. And do I have control of this then?
Have presenter what? Yes, you do. You are a presenter. You should be able to forward. You can use the arrows at the bottom of the screen here to advance and go forward and back. Let's see if that should work.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the outreach portion of the project. One of the things that made this project unique from the very beginning is we had outreach built right into the project with the science. And the outreach folks were at the table from the very beginning all the way through. Many of you may recall that we had a meeting where we all got together as Sea Grant outreach folks, and that meeting was held at Purdue. I believe it was 2 years ago. And at that time, we got to meet with the researchers. We got to see some of the progress they were making. And then we spent a lot of time as a group, and we brought some users from each of our states, and we spent a lot of time as a group talking about what the needs would be for the outputs of such a decision support system and how we might use that in our communities. As Brian mentioned, there are researchers involved from many of the Great Lakes states and universities. But more important, and I won't go back over that, but I would like to highlight the outreach folks that were involved from all the Great Lakes states as well. So we have somebody involved from every Sea Grant program, and we have been working as a group. We've had periodic conference calls over the last 2 years. Then we've even broke into subgroups that I'll talk about, and sometimes we were meeting on a weekly basis. So a lot of work has gone into this and a lot of thought in the decision support system. This is pretty important because the whole Tipping Points project addresses one of Sea Grant's 4 focus areas, and that's the sustainable coastal development area. And we decided as a group that there are 2 primary audiences that we can carry this decision support system to. One of those is to the watershed planners, and the other is to the land use planning bodies in our local communities. And the thing that we talked about a lot 2 years ago was when we meet with watershed planners or land use planners, what is the final output that they are trying to develop? And in both cases, they're trying to develop action plans for either their watershed or their community. So as we built the decision support system, we were doing that with the knowledge that ultimately we wanted to help those decision bodies come up with an action plan. Now, we've learned some lessons over time from some of the past decision support system projects that we've had. And one of the lessons that we learned is that educators and planners do not generally go to a website and just use it independently. We were kind of surprised by this early on, but when you think about it, it's not that surprising. A lot of folks don't want to know where to go for this kind of decision support. They would like to know who will come and help them use the decision support. What we do notice is when you put online decision support systems out there, the highest use that you ultimately get are from consultants and professional staff. And those are the folks that will ultimately take the time to really learn the system and use it in a day-to-day decision-making process. And over time, we came to the realization that the greatest need is to really develop a data-driven tool that can support community visioning discussions. One of the things we found in Indiana is that communities get to that visioning stage, whether they're developing a watershed plan or a land use plan, they get to that visioning stage only periodically. And that's kind of the teachable moment. And when they get to that stage, they often bring in outside extension support to help facilitate that visioning discussion. And we think that a tool such as we're developing here really is most effective in those kind of visioning discussions. There's generally only a few people that are trained to conduct those kind of visioning discussions in their state, and we see those folks, and all of you are some of those people. We see those folks as the primary audience for this original delivery of the decision support tool, because you're the ones that are probably most likely to use it in visioning discussions in your community. Other folks that you may want to consider from your states training with this tool might be extension professionals, and ultimately, if we get additional funding for the project, we're thinking about reaching out to the consultants. There are consulting groups that spend a lot of time doing visioning with communities and land use plans or in leading watershed plans, and we think they would be a pretty good user group for this kind of a decision support system. One of the things I want to spend a little time talking about is the formal user needs assessment that we conducted as we were getting ready to build the decision support system. All of the work here was done by Kim Robison, who is a PhD student at Purdue under the direction of Dr. Pijanowski. And I'm probably going to do Kim a disservice, but I'm going to boil her dissertation down to about 5 slides. And it was a 200 and some page dissertation, but I'm going to get it down to 5 slides for you. Essentially, she conducted a survey of land use planners around all 8 Great Lakes states, and she had 302 respondents, and she was looking at planners that worked at a multitude of scales, from the municipal to the county township all the way to the regional scale. An additional thing she did is, many of you will recall when you were with us at Purdue 2 years ago, Kim conducted some workflow diagram sessions with us for both the planners and the extension people, or the specialists. We did a Q-sort activity, which is where we had, it's a technique that's used to try and come up with things that we think are important. And then we did a use and usability analysis. And I'm just going to briefly go through what we learned from those exercises. What the planners told us in the survey, that their top environmental issues that they're dealing with are confined animal feeding operations, discharge of industrial pollutants, and algal bloom activities. Only a third of another thing that we learned was only a third of non-municipal jurisdictions really find it easy to link land use decisions to water quality. And part of the reason they feel they have a problem with that is they feel they don't have control over point sources. And they feel like there seems to be a feeling that the point sources is where most of that control can occur. For that reason, municipalities were a little more confident that through the planning they had a little more, about half felt that they had some influence over water quality by controlling land use decisions. What this particular decision support tool does we're hoping that it's designed in such a way to give the planning bodies a little more control over non-point source water quality issues. The other thing we learned from planners is the four most desired functions of a decision support system, or to be able to evaluate potential impacts of future land use on water quality. They want the ability to assess existing environmental conditions and their causes. They want to view data in a variety of formats, not just maps, but also in graphs and tables. And they want to view data across multiple scales. When we conducted the workflow discussion, we learned some interesting things. And for those of you that were at the meeting, you may recall this was kind of like a concept mapping exercise, where both planners and extension folks were asked to kind of lay out what the process is from making land use or watershed decisions to getting to an endpoint. I think the real take-home message is here that in most cases, the steps that an extension specialist will go through is very similar to the steps that a land use planner goes through, with two exceptions. The things that extension specialists identified that were not identified by planners were number 9 and 10 there. Working with communities toward a unified development ordinance or adoption of a final plan. And you all identified the need for coming up with evaluation indicators of progress and success. The other thing that stood out in this is some of the things that the planners found the most difficult were the things that extension folks had a little higher success rate in, and the inverse of that is also true. So number 4 there, securing potential support and funds for natural resource type projects was something that land use planners felt that took a lot of their time and they had a low success rate in doing. Conversely, that was something that the extension folks identified as a high success rate. What that says is that's a particular area where we can work well together well with the planners in our communities, and together we can have a pretty high success rate in finding support and fund, both political support and financial support for natural resource projects. And then number 9 is the other one. Planners indicate that they spend most of their time on working toward unified development and adoption of ordinances. And this is an area that extension specialists found the most difficult and time consuming. So again, this is a place where a partnership with our planners would be very beneficial. So take-home messages here is it's really clear that we can complement each other. We have all identified that community visioning and outreach is the most time-consuming and data-intensive. For that reason, when we get into the decision support system, you're going to see that we've developed a crowd gauge-like component, and that's to address this community visioning need that both planners and extension specialists have identified. I've already covered the part where about the seeking political and financial funding. One of the needs that came up is that there's a real need to gather and transfer user needs to research. And we all know that extension is a two-way street. This is something that we routinely do in our daily extension lives, and I think that really came through here in our needs assessment, that especially in the land use planning area, there's a need for us to identify future needs that we can take to the researchers. And the reverse is also true. There's a need to find a way to take a lot of this cutting edge research, like these tipping point results, and then getting them into the decision process. And our decision support system is an attempt to do that. And then there's a need to develop collaborative networks across jurisdictions. And this is the whole thing about multiple scales. And as we get into the maps later, you'll see that a lot of the water quality issues that a community might be dealing with are really being caused from upstream or up watersheds that are upstream. And you can't really start to address some of these things until you're doing larger scale watershed or land use planning. So this multi-jurisdictional decision making is an important one that keeps coming up, and I think it's one that extension specialists are in a position to deal with. One of the interesting things that came out of the Q-sort is that there was agreement among the folks that were studied that we really shouldn't spend a lot of time with this particular tool weighting economics over water quality or assessing commercial fishing. It came out as something that really wasn't or recreational fishing didn't come out as a key concern, or favoring commercial uses over environmental uses. So that just says that for the purpose of these kinds of decisions, it's important to look at the natural resources on their own. One of the things we learned from use and usability were 4 things came out here that the users wanted. One was the ability to do asset mapping. What are the natural resource assets in the community? Being able to conduct what-if models, being able to use dashboards, and then visioning tools. And as you see Jared's presentation, you'll see that we've made an attempt at all those. In addition, some of the things that came out from the users, from the survey work, is they wanted to be able to, the additional things were to assess current conditions of land use, to be able to do what-if models, to be able to delineate where key natural lands might be, and ultimately to determine the impact of land use change on human health and recreation. Number 6 here is one that we realize is a need. That's one we're probably not going to get to with the very first version of the decision support system. Some of the research that's been done that you will hear about is aiming at human health. We didn't have much that really worked on recreation at this stage. I will say that some of the human health things, I believe there's probably another research step before we're going to be able to get that into the decision support system. Let's see. So elements of visioning or plan development processes are to identify a community asset. So what I'm going to say about this is everybody understood that community visioning was really important. And normally when we do community visioning, as you all know, so often we're dealing with the things that are there in white. We're looking at the social issues. So often we don't have the ability to bring the natural resource things to those discussions. We ask people about community assets. We ask them about their social values, threats to the things they hold dear, and the changes they would like to see in their community. Often those discussions go to those social and qualitative things. And many times the natural resource things are valued, but there isn't a way to put them on the same plane. Often that data just isn't available. For the development of this decision support system, we're trying to bring those natural resource values to the discussion. So one of the ways we did that, and I only throw this slide up there so you can see how much hard work many of you have done. There was a group of us that included Kristen, Kara Salazar, Jesse Schomburg, Marty Jaffe, myself, and we worked together over almost with weekly meetings over a long period of time. And what we were trying to do was go through the literature and come up with connections between the social values that communities often highlight as very important, and then the natural resource actions that a community might be able to take, and the effect that our natural resource actions then have on those community values. And this is necessary in order to develop something like a crowd gauge-like tool. So the take-home message is that a lot of work has gone into this. Marty Jaffe has had some of his graduate students helping develop this part of the tool, and you're going to get to see the products of all that work when we meet in October. One of the key problems is how to help communities identify the assets and the threats they have to sustainability. One of the ways that we can help with that is to come up with data-driven tools, and you have to do that, you have to have some sort of metric that identifies the threshold. Brian talked to you about tipping points, and many of you are familiar with the NEMO example. And without knowing it, we were essentially using tipping points. Anybody that has a NEMO program is familiar with the idea that we've always looked at impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces essentially is an indicator, and we had identified tipping limits or tipping points. And those limits that we always used were 10% and 25%. 10% was that low threshold beyond which where you started to see some variability and problems in a stream, and then over 25% was kind of that point of no return. Interestingly, as you see some of the results, when you hear Mike Wiley talk in future presentations, some of the numbers they were coming up with are very close to this. And you'll see some of these same thresholds coming up in terms of percent urban in a watershed. So tipping points really can provide, this project can provide some additional thresholds like percent ag in a buffer that we really haven't had before now. And it gives a community an ability to see where they are now, where they will be in the future, and then what practices they might be able to use to overcome this. So if you think back to the slides that I've shown previously, there were a few main things that planners and communities told us that they needed. One is to identify what their current condition is. And we now have tools that show these current land use conditions and not only show them in map formats, but also are able to display them in graphical and potentially in tabular formats. An additional step that we have to go through in any kind of an action plan process is identifying those areas that actually need protection and actually drawing some places on maps where if we're going to protect open space or farmland in a future plan, where might that most valuable land be? And you're going to see that we're developing tools and sections that allow that to occur. A third one is, where should land use changes or restorations be located? That's kind of that's related to the previous step that I just showed you, and this is basically the development of a composite map where you can, which is a key to an asset plan, where you start to draw circles on areas where you want to protect land or favor restoration. And then where are we relative to the sustainable limits? Are we getting close to a tipping point, or do we have a ways to go? And then where are we going to be in the future? And I think Dr. Pijanowski is going to talk a little bit about some of the growth projection work that they've developed. And that helps us not only see what our current conditions are, but it also can help us see where we're going to be in the future. And that's often where communities, where some of their problems might come in, and that's what they want to start planning for. And then the question is, what are some things we might need to do differently to stay under the tipping point? And that leads us to action strategies. And again, a lot of work went into thinking through the various things that a community might be able to do in order to affect their water quality. I show this matrix for one reason, and I would like you to just kind of keep this matrix in your mind as you see the additional presentations over the next several weeks. all of the things that you see across the top of this matrix are the kinds of things that a community might be able to impact. These are going to be gauges that show up in the decision support system. So impervious surfaces and runoff gauges, reducing nutrients, reducing land cover that might be leading to a water quality problem. So every gauge that we have is going across the top of this matrix, and then what a community can do about it is going down the matrix. And this matrix is really the black box that's running the whole decision support system. We're going to share this matrix with you when you come to the training workshop in October. And so you're going to get to see the menu of options that sit behind the decision support system. But I'd like you to have this in your mind so that you can kind of see how it all fit together. And then ultimately, the output of the decision support system is to come up with an action plan. And we as a group have a little more work to do on how we want to format this action plan. And you're all going to have a role in helping us think through that. Our project timeline, the beta version is going to be out in October when we all come together. We're going to have our train the trainer at that time. Then you all have to get to work and do trainings in your state that have to be completed by the spring of 2014. As we're testing this and using it in our communities, we're going to see some things we need to make changes to, and we're hoping to have all those changes made and incorporated by May of 2014.